I've returned to Ghana this time in particular to participate in the first learning forum of the Global Compact in Africa, which is taking place here in Accra, and it will give an opportunity to look at business and human rights. But because the initiative that I lead, Realising Rights, is engaged in looking at decent work issues, we've taken the opportunity to look at decent work, particularly as it affects the mining sector. And so we've linked with Oxfam and a number of other organisations, both on the support for communities affected by mining and the legal side, taking legal cases. So it's been very, very interesting so far.
What do you think about extraterritorial responsibilities of countries like Canada towards these communities who are affected by, for instance, Canadian mining interests?
It's an interesting question because I think it's important to look at the different responsibilities. Certainly the government of Ghana, which has a golden share, about 10% of each of the mining companies, and in some cases more than that, has a responsibility. The companies themselves have a direct responsibility if they're violating human rights, and that's something we're particularly interested in. But I also think that where governments are aware that companies that they lobby for, support, negotiate, sometimes use their influence, they all also need to accept that they have a responsibility to ensure that there is not a track record of abuses, a whole sense of, for example, not offering fair compensation for cocoa tree cutting down. I mean, I've heard that, and it seems to be even the top end of the price, that about $9 is offered, the equivalent, to farmers for a cocoa tree, and yet the market value is at least $20 a year, and these trees have between 30 and 50 years of economic life. So that's a horrible underpaying, and you know, a country like Canada shouldn't stand over that if that's the case. I've also heard of polluting a whole town, which is I think, you know, something that again is a direct responsibility of the government here, but there is a secondary responsibility. And Canada and other major donor countries have a responsibility through the IFIs. The IFC, the International Finance Corporation, has been under you know, giving loans, and that in itself raises responsibility both of the IFC but also of the major donor companies who in fact are very influential in the policies of the IFC, IMF, World Bank.
And what do you think of corporate social responsibility as a voluntary system, as opposed to putting in place legal norms where communities like in Ghana could go back to, let's say, Canada and prosecute a mining company there?
There is a need, I think, to go beyond the purely voluntary. And we have been working, my colleagues and I, in Realising Rights in support of the mandate of Professor John Ruggie as the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Business and Human Rights. He will be giving a report to the Human Rights Council, and then if his mandate is renewed, he will be tackling that very issue of whether there is a core of responsibility. Meanwhile, you do have more and more initiatives, such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. One of the things that the non-governmental organisations and the legal support groups have been telling me is the lack of transparency, the lack of awareness of what exactly is the situation, and the way in which there are hidden supports to companies from the bilateral relationships between Ghana and these other countries, and how that bilateral relationship is sometimes exerted to prevent communities from being able to even air their grievances effectively. So I'm very glad that the Human Rights Commission here in Accra has set in train a very deliberate process which will start with a stakeholder meeting on the 12th of December and go on into 2007, and hopefully give a good base for bringing home the extent of very real violations of human rights which seem to be occurring.